Good evening. I'm Kim Malville, a professor emeritus in the Department of Astrophysical and Planetary Sciences, and I'm on the executive committee of the Retired Faculty Association, which has been organizing this seminar, the series of seminars by our distinguished professors in the university for the past year. I am extremely pleased to present Professor Bernard Amadei tonight. He has been a major player in creating the Engineers Without Borders, an extraordinary institution that builds bridges and repairs pumps and drills wells and all sorts of engineering, solves all sorts of engineering problems around the world. I must say that I believe I speak for my fellow faculty members at the university that we all are very proud to be members of the same institution as Bernard, considering what he has accomplished. He will be introduced by Professor Balaji, who is chair of the Department of Civil Engineering, Environmental, and Architectural Engineering. But first, let me suggest that if you have any questions throughout tonight's talk, you can enter them in the chat box. And please keep your telephones muted. And this talk by Professor Amade will be recorded. So, Dr. Balaji, I turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce my distinguished colleague, Dr. Bernard Amadei. He's a distinguished professor and a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, Civil Environmental and Architectural Engineering at here. He received his PhD in 1982 from the University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Amadei is the founding director of the Mortensen Center in Engineering for Developing Communities. He's also the founding president of Engineers Without Borders, USA, and the co-founder of the Engineers Without Borders International Network. He's got tons of distinctions. As I said, we can spend the entire evening reading all of those. I will highlight a few of those which are really significant, starting from the 2015 ASE Opal Award. ASE is the American Society of Civil Engineers. And then he's elected member to US National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Construction, and an elected senior Ashoka Fellow. Besides that, he holds several honorary degrees from universities in US and around the world. In 2013 and 14, Dr. Bernard Amadei served as a science envoy to Pakistan and Nepal for the US Department of State. And in his spare time, he also holds a commercial pilot license, multi-engine landing and instrument landing capability. So I want to close by this before I hand it over to Professor Amadei. He's a true visionary, one of those rare individuals who is able to piece together what may seem to others unrelated situations, events, and create a new and compelling vision for engineering education and then engineering practice in general. Through his continued transformative vision, leadership, scholarship, and mentoring, and inspiring the next generation of engineers to practice engineering with a soul, which is something you'll hear today in his talk. And all of these is what distinguishes him and makes him, sets him up from all the rest of us. So we are really pleased, proud, and delighted to have him as a colleague. And as Kim said, as a colleague, not just in the department, but also as a colleague to the campus and to the larger world. So with that, please welcome Dr. Bernard Amadei. Bernard, take it away.
Okay, good evening, actually, all of you. It's been a long day, lecture this morning, lecture this afternoon, and now the lecture. And it's indeed my great pleasure to spend some time with you and talk about engineering and the importance of engineering and addressing the global issues that we are facing on our planet today. I've been at CU for 40 years, and I'm obviously very grateful for the tenure that was given to me during that period. Have explored all sorts of crazy things, and keep on doing it. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work in the area of system engineering, but also peace engineering. And I will say a few words about peace engineering. In particular, this area of how can engineers contribute to a more peaceful world. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Balaji, for the nice introduction. And I'm now going to switch to my PowerPoint presentation. So global engagement for a small planet. That's what I'm going to talk about today, and why actually engineering is so critical to addressing the problems that we were facing before COVID-19, issues of climate change, issues of resettlement, migration of people, urbanization, environmental damage to the planet, and obviously COVID has added its own share of issues. Some issues essentially needed to be addressed, to be frank with you, the issue of injustice, the issue of inequity, but some other issues were also created. All those issues need to be addressed by essentially what I would call science, technology, and engineering, STE. So I may refer to STE across my lecture tonight, and not just engineering. So here is a quote that I borrowed from the National Academy of Engineering that best describes essentially the underlying idea behind my lecture tonight. This idea of a world divided by wealth and poverty, health and sickness, food and hunger cannot long remain a stable and peaceful place for civilization to thrive. Over the past 40 years more, over the past 20 years, after creating Engineers Without Borders and the Mortensen Center, I spent a lot of time during that period. I spent a lot of time in working in various communities around the world, and where people essentially, their job is to stay alive by the end of the day. And I quickly learned about the importance of engineering, not traditional engineering as I was taught to do when I was a student, but a different type of engineering, more humanitarian type of engineering, where we need to bring the heart and in connected with the top 3 inches of the head, essentially with the brain. So how do we bring a topic that I'm working on right now? I'm actually working a book on compassion and action. Another title for this book is called Engineering with Soul. How do we bring compassion into the work of engineering? How do we educate essentially young people about the inner dimension of humanity? And how do we bring that inner dimension into the work in the world? As I mentioned to you, doing a lot of work in the field of peace with colleagues at University of New Mexico, as well as Drexel University. I helped start some programs over there, worked with some colleagues who studied a master's degree on peace engineering at Drexel University, and also peace engineering more recently at UNM in Albuquerque. Our vision: can we create a peace industrial complex that is so powerful that it will dislodge the war industrial complex? Let me repeat that, and you better fasten your seatbelt. Can we create a peace industrial complex that is so powerful that it will essentially make the war industrial complex obsolete over time? And I do believe that science technologists and engineers have a critical role to play in creating that peace industrial complex. Not only do we need to teach peace in engineering education, but we also need to practice peace in engineering practice. So, question that after 40 years of being at the University of Colorado, having traveled the world and having faced some challenges on my own, the question I'm asking is the following question: do today's STEM graduates have the skills and the tools to address the global problems that our planet and humans are facing today and will be facing within the rest of the 21st century? And the answer is no. And I'm going to go point blank there. And the answer is no, because we are still essentially educating, at least in the case of engineers the traditional way. And our mode of education, our engineering education is, in my opinion, out of touch with the reality of the world. We are living in what this gentleman Tully said, a VUCA world, VUCA times, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Where on earth do we train young people to address that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of our times and the times to come? And that's a very strong message I'm going to send. I'm not saying that the model of engineering of education that we have today is bad. It's just not, it needs to be modified. It needs to be updated to address the problems of the 21st century, not the problems of the 17th century, 18th century, and 19th century, based on what Descartes and Newton were thinking about the world was about. So this is something that I'm really concerned about. So the problems that we are dealing with here are multiple: peace, conflict, climate change, population growth. I mentioned that to you before. How do we address those issues in the engineering curriculum? If a young person today were to come to the University of Colorado or any university in the United States and say, well, during the next 4 years, I want to study climate change, where would that young person go? There's no department or institute of climate change on campus. In my opinion, there's a need to create essentially programs where young people like that person interested in climate change or refugee issues or population growth issues and so on could go to over the next 4 years and learn to think about climate change across the board, not in vertical silos. And I will come back to that later on. So that's when I meant that the problems we are facing today, and I'm going to quote again Albert Einstein, that would be my last slide, cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them. We know that. Not only do we need to change the mindset, but we also need to change the leadership style. Problems cannot be solved with the same form of leadership that created them. Problems cannot be solved with the same level of compassion or the lack of compassion that created them. It's more than a mindset. And mindset is necessary, but a change in mindset is necessary, but a change in mindset is not sufficient. So the problems are big, and the problems cut across all sorts of domains. And here is an example of what to expect between now and 2050. An increase in energy by 80% compared to today's baseline. Water needs 55% increase in 2050, and food needs 60% increase by 2050. How on earth are we going to handle those needs? Where are we going to find our resources? Now, 2050 is 30 years from now, even less than that. And the people who are going to be in position of management in 2050 or even in 2040 are sitting in our classrooms today. How do we train those young people to address problems that they will be facing as decision makers in 2040 and 2050? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. And it's time for us at the university to think how to do it. Some university will probably do it, others won't. And the university that will not essentially train young people to address those global issues are likely to disappear. Young people are going to go to places where they are going to be educated in areas they want to study. So it's just a warning here. I'm not saying that we are doing anything bad. It's just like when we look at those numbers here, those numbers came in 2015. It's good science behind it. Not only do we need to worry about energy, food, and water, but we also need to worry about, and I wrote a book about it, the nexus between energy, food, and water. The three are interconnected, and that nexus cannot be addressed with traditional Cartesian way of thinking. The only way we can address nexus problems is through system thinking. system dynamics, agent-based modeling, complexity theory, whatever you want there. Do we teach our students to think that way today? Here are some, I keep pushing my mouse in the wrong direction. I don't know what it is. Should go in the reverse tonight. But here are some problems. Some of our students would be addressing global problems like this one. Here's an example of social connections among sample of 10 million Facebook users in 2010. Our problem, climate change, is at that scale. How do we train young engineers and scientists to address problems at that scale? Where do we train other students to work on at a small scale? And that project of San Pablo, as I brought it up, because that's where Engineers Without Borders started. It was 2000, 2001, 2002. I had visited essentially the village of San Pablo in this one here in 2000, came back to University of Colorado. I told the students a Mayan village, people living on less than $1 a day, having big issues with water. And the little girl who changed me is here. That little girl, I was told, was carrying water from the river behind those homes to the village every day, and as a result, could not go to school. They told me, hey, you're a civil engineer, do something about it. I say, wait a minute. I say, I have a PhD. I say, we don't care about your PhD. We don't even know what it is. And so I came back, went to CU. I was teaching engineering geology at the time. And I told the students about that village of San Pablo and say, hey, we want to get involved in that. So 5 students came, 10 students came, 15 students came, and we raised $14,000 at the time. I had never done a project like that in my life. And we raised a little bit of money to cover our trip and to put together a ramp pump. And I remember at the time, an old technology. I was not even aware of that technology, but I had to talk to some old timers at the time to tell me about it worked. And we built a ramp pump with the help of a colleague, put the whole thing together. System broke. Came back, system broke. And 3 times we decided essentially to change the design after 3 attempts at essentially providing water from the river to the village. Essentially what we found was upstream of where that little girl was a waterfall, 7 feet of waterfall. And we were able to convert the potential energy of that waterfall into enough pressure to push the water about 110 feet to the village. What struck me the most first was that how the project was presented to me. It was not presented from a technical point of view. It was about improving the life of that little girl and the other little girls here so that they could go to school. It was humanitarian. It was social. It was not engineering. We could care less about any technology I was going to bring there as long as the end result was the little girls could go to school. It was education. Another thing that struck me was the response of our students. When I saw 5, 10, 15 students coming to my office and say, hey, we want to be part of this, and we're going to call, by the way, we're going to call it Engineers Without Borders, and say, whoa, just calm down. I'm supposed to publish or perish here, right? I mean, that's my job. Now you're telling me to help some little girls at the middle of the jungle? Yeah, that's what we want. I said, why is it that you want to do that? They say, we want, and I will never forget that, we want meaningful engineering education. And I say, don't you get meaningful engineering education in class? Say, no, we are sick and tired of doing those problems at the end of chapter 5. And I told them I'm sick and tired of grading them. So we had a win-win. That's how Engineers Without Borders started. Essentially, lots of excitement from students, and the rest is history. Now we have about close to 15 or 17,000 members across the United States, students and professionals essentially included. But it started with that little girl. It started with a social issue. It did not start with come on over and put a pump here. And I want you to remember that, because essentially that little girl changed my life forever, and the students as well. In fact, I'm forever grateful to the students, essentially, because they dragged me into creating Engineers Without Borders with a lot of kicking and screaming, believe me. And I'm glad I followed them. So the initiative came from the students, and I was willing to listen to them. They wanted meaningful engineering education. Other challenges that we need to address. I think the challenges can be broken down into 3 groups, 4 if you want. For the developed world, the challenges are to consume less and to be more intelligent on how we consume. How do we train engineers who are working in a developed world, a term that I don't necessarily like, but again, I'm going to use it because most people use it, to understand sustainability. We do a pretty good job at that. I think we have classes on sustainability. We have classes in environmental engineering and civil engineering. Our students are exposed to that kind of stuff. On the other side of the world, you have the developing world, where the challenges are to stay alive by the end of the day. What's the role of science and engineering and technology in preventing people from dying by the end of the day, period? You have about 3 to 4 billion people on our planet whose job is to try to stay alive by the end of the day. What's the contribution of STE, science, technology, and engineering, in meeting that goal? And in between, you have the emerging markets. The emerging markets are the markets of China, India, South America. These are people who were in a developing world before, trying to catch up with the developed world. And there are many of them, billions of them, actually. The challenge then is for them to grow economically while respecting human and natural system, and by not repeating the same mistakes the developed world has made in the past. For all, it's about injustice. It's about addressing issues of injustice and issues of inequality, ecological, racial, social, economic, and gender, regardless of where you are on the planet. You want to see the world, the best way to see the world is to see the world at night, and make sure that I say that it's a compounded view of the world at night. I mentioned that to you because one time I was in Pakistan and someone told me, this picture is wrong. I said, what do you mean it's wrong? I mean, the world is never at night all at once. But what do you see here? I think what you see here is a good example of essentially where the developing world and emerging markets are. Through electricity. 400 million people here, including the Canadians, 400 million people here, including East Europe whatsoever. Look at the continent of Africa, 1.1 billion people, 54 countries. The only little, you can see that little spaghetti looking type of light there, that's the Nile River. When you don't have electricity, what happens? No economic development, no education, pumps are not working, industry cannot pick up and gain traction. You have about 700 million people in Africa who do not have access to electricity. Heck of a challenge for science, technology, and engineering. How are we going to address that problem? Are we going to create a grid across Africa? No way. No, if you know the size there. I remember flying to Johannesburg one time, and some of you may have done it. From here to here, it's 10 hours. From here to here is 10 hours of flying. This is big. So if the grid is not available, what other options do we have? I think an option that has been looked at and is likely to be very promising is an option of decentralized, essentially, energy system. More in line with participation at the local level. So a decentralized system could be water system, energy system, food system, all of them combined. That essentially is that would provide essentially services and resources to several villages. The grid is not going to work. So I keep telling to my colleagues in electrical engineering, hey, you guys have a heck of a big market to deal with in Africa. Why do you essentially provide electricity in North America when you can provide electricity to 700 million customers essentially in Africa? You see the same, what about China? Look at China. You have a population of 1.4 billion, about 400 million Chinese live like Americans. What about the other 1 billion? They want to live like the other 400 million. They also want electricity, and so on, and resources. Again, I go back to the diagram I presented earlier about the additional needs for electricity, water, and food between now and 2050. The question is still wide open. How are we going to solve those problems? How are we going to provide resources to an increasing population that is more connected than ever? One approach that has been proposed, I just wanted to make sure, is the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, created by the United Nations in 2015. So it's a 2015-2030, essentially window. And as you can see, those 17 SDGs address all sorts of issues that you and I take for granted, that are not for granted in many parts of the world. And those SDGs, by the way, are for everyone, not just for the developing world. One in particular that I'm going to focus is this one here. It's about peace. Sustainability will not take place. Sustainability and peace are interrelated. It's hard to envision a sustainable world that is not peaceful. And it's hard to envision a peaceful world that does not include sustainable practices. There's a lot of work that has been done on those 17 SDGs, in particular, the connections between the 17 SDGs. And that's several system dynamic models and agent-based models have been constructed to try to capture how those sustainable development goals interact with each other. Some contribute positively to some other SDGs, but some, if they happen, they may also create, may have a negative impact on some other SDGs. So it's important to see that those 17 SDGs are not 17 independent silos, that they depend on each other. That sustainable development is to look at those 17 boxes, but also to look at how those 17 boxes are interacting with each other. This is a big vision. Some people say there's no way by 2030 we're going to make it, especially after COVID. Essentially, the agreement, or it's now perceived that it may take another 10 years, essentially, before we can reach the targets that are listed for those SDGs because of COVID. We are running essentially behind. Issue of food insecurity is big in the world today. It started in 2007. It's getting worse and worse and worse over time. Water insecurity is also an issue that because of climate change, and energy insecurity being related to food and to water is also affected by that. So again, the importance of looking at the interaction, at the nexus again between the three. I don't care if you think about the 17 goals and so on. For me, based on my own experience, the goal is very simple. How can all humans, yes, all humans, 7.8 billion people, have fulfilling lives, meet their basic needs, and live with dignity and at peace? To me, that's my goal. And with Engineers Without Borders, essentially, we have been trying to reach that goal. Of course, it's going to take years. It's going to take much longer than I have left on this planet, but it's a goal that is worthwhile to follow. And if you look more specifically about this major goal, it's about education. Can we provide basic education to everybody on the planet? Can we provide good quality food with 22,000 calories, 2,300 calories per person per day for the global community? Can we provide basic energy? I remember I did some work in Afghanistan 7 years in a row. So I did not spend 7 years in Afghanistan, but I would spend small blocks. And I remember when electricity came to Kabul, until about 2005, 2007, there was no electricity in Kabul, Afghanistan. And I remember quite well when a little bit of electricity came, and the kids at night would do their homework assignments under a light post. It was really painful to see that, but at the same time, it's amazing. I don't see too often kids on campus studying under a light post. But there was such a need, a desire to study, a desire to learn. I wish I could share with you pictures that I have in my head over the past 20 years of kids smiling because they have a little bit of water, of kids smiling because they have a little bit of electricity, a kid smiling because they have food in their stomach. That to me is engineering. And that's also science. And that's science with a human face, and it's science with a human soul. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm working on right now, a book on science, technology, and engineering. It's mostly engineering with a human soul. You see it, the inner dimension of engineering compared to the stuff we do, more tech, more gizmos. Yeah, and the world could use that, but the world could also use a little bit more compassion and a lot more caring and a few more smiles than we have had before. And to me, that's my mission statement, is to be of service. And so for all of you who are listening to it, to my presentation tonight, and I'm a bit tired because I've been lecturing pretty much many times today, my question to you, and I'm going to give you a homework assignment, is what's your mission statement? What's your mission statement? What are you here for? What is the gift that you only have that can change the world? What is that gift? Once you find that gift, by the way, you better fasten your seatbelt because the universe is going to provide. Oh, now I'm tapping into the concept of soul, inner work, compassion, love. Love is a 4-letter word that nobody talks about on campus. Boy, we use a lot of other 4-letter words on campus. How do we bring compassion into the classroom? How do we make engineers more compassionate, more caring? What classes do they have to take for that to happen so that the work that they do is good for the planet, is good for the environment. It brings peace into the world. So that's essentially, that's a big picture, developing a new generation of scientists and engineers for the 21st century. Not the traditional nerds who derive differential equations all day long, ad nauseum, and repeat that all week long. But individuals who are change makers, peacemakers, social entrepreneurs, and facilitators of sustainable development. So this kind of education, I look at it and say, well, suppose I were a dean, I will never be a dean because I don't have the patience to be a dean. I tell Balaji, I will never be a chairman of a department because I don't have the patience to be a chairman of the department. I applaud and commend those of you who decide to become chairman, chairwomen, chair people, and deans. I think you gain brownie points. I think it has to be a karmic credit that you get. So so next time around, you can take it easy. Nobody's going to bother you. But I still have to gain that karmic credit doing my next incarnation, I guess. But if you look at the way, if I were to create a program, how would I create it? I would go from the traditional way of looking at things, depth, the I type of education, it's sometimes called in the academies, depth. That's how we have trained engineers. That's how we have trained scientists over the past essentially 100 to 200 years. What we want is to go from depth to breadth and depth. That young lady that I mentioned to you earlier who wants to study climate change should have a major. That major could be computer science, just an example, or civil engineering. But that lady should be able to broaden her education right here. What's in there? Well, for someone who is interested in international development, it's about sociology. It's about languages. It's about learning about cultures. It's learning about ethics. It's learning about languages. It's learning about anthropology. That to me is the education that is more in line with the needs of the planet today. And we can go into more and more details. How do I do that? The first thing I would do is to get people, it's about cosmology. I do strong belief in cosmology. And in fact, in the book on compassion and action right now, I do believe that if we do not remember our connection to the universe, if we are not, if we do not remember awe and wonder then we need to think twice about the type of science and the type of engineering that we do on a regular basis. Again, talking about here, connecting, someone mentioned that the longest path is the path between the top 3 inches of the head and the heart, 18 inches. How do we connect the two together? How do we reconnect with the great mystery? Not talking about spirituality. I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about rediscovering the concept of awe and wonder about the universe. I came across this quote here, which led to me to writing my new book. And it came from a psychologist, and I want you to read it. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. That led me right now to writing that book. When I saw that, I said, right on. I'm not ignoring traditional engineering, traditional science, but what is driving the problems that we are facing on our planet today? If all problems in the world on our planet today were technical, we would have solved them by now. Why is it that we have not solved them yet? It has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with human behavior. And how do we train engineers and scientists in approaching problems with the right attitude, with the right ethics, with the right cultural approach? Believe me, if you do some work with Engineers Without Borders and you're not willing to learn about cultures, you're going to be miserable. Where do we train, again, scientists and engineers and technologists to address issues of greed, selfishness, apathy, values in our curriculum? We don't. We don't even train engineers to deal with conflict. And who has not had conflict in a lifetime? If you have a partner for more than one day, you know what conflict is about. Ethics, conflict. In engineering, you're going to have conflict with your customers. You're going to conflict with your teammates. Where do we train young people to learn about that stuff? We don't. Because it's not scientific. Compassion. In fact, we have to say, okay, we need to introduce compassion into the engineering curriculum. I think Balaji would say, you crazy? How do you measure compassion? You know, in science and engineering, if you cannot measure something, you cannot manage it. Therefore, it doesn't exist. We have been repeating that story, that lie since Descartes came up with 4 basic statements in a dream in 1619. Matters of the mind and matters of the soul are completely do not match, do not mix up together. The universe is a great machine. Well, today we are realizing that the universe is a great thought instead of a great machine. Wow, how do we bring that into the classroom? So it's changing the mindset from a reptilian way of thinking, bottom right, to a more cosmic way of thinking. And more recently, I've become really interested in the work of spiral dynamics by Steve McIntosh, Don Beck, and Ken Wilber, talking about different levels of consciousness. And there's an entire science behind it. I don't want to go into the details of it, but essentially we can look at population with different levels of consciousness. It's not who we are in terms of, it's how we think, how we look at the world is based on our levels of consciousness. And a red type of consciousness would be Donald Trump. I'll give you an example, a benchmark right there, right? Be reptilian, right? You bite, you chew, you spit, you bite, you chew, you spit, you bite, chew, until you run out of food. And when you run out of food, you find food next door and you repeat the process. Compare, say, to much higher levels of consciousness. Boulder as a city is green. It has essentially, it's not, egocentric type of behavior. As a city, as an organization, as an individual, you can look at different levels of consciousness. I don't want to go into the details. But that reptilian way of thinking is very dangerous, by the way. You don't see too many crocodiles that smile. You have to be careful when you get very close to crocodiles. And, if you say gentle crocodile, calm down, they bite you. So how do we go from a reptilian way of thinking to a more cosmic way of thinking? Nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with religion, everything to do with reconnecting with essentially the universe, reconnecting with the concept of awe and wonder. And how do we integrate that reconnection into the curriculum? Without talking about religion, without talking about spirituality. Because once you are aware and you are in awe and you are that concept of wonder, your design, your implementation, your planning of your engineering project will be different. I guarantee it. Compared to reptilian brain, which is more essentially competitive and very fearful and based on hate. How do you design with this mindset? How do you design with that mindset? System thinking, important for our students to learn that systems are interconnected. Here we have different types of system, human system, infrastructure system. When I teach system thinking, I present projects. Here's an example. I'm going to show you an example of a project, or system thinking here. How do we teach traditional education? It's this. Bachelor's, master's, doctoral. Bachelor's, at least, they cut across different disciplines. Master's, fewer disciplines. And doctoral level, little discipline, just one discipline. Okay, remember this model, and I'm going to show you this case study. This case study is water basin in Israel. It starts in the West Bank. Water comes here, crosses Israel, essentially connects the different communities here, goes into some Bedouin communities and other Israeli communities, and goes into Gaza. How would you approach that problem? Would you approach that problem from a technical point of view, from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, from a political point of view? The answer is from all points of view. How do we train our young people to address a problem like this one? This is not a make-believe type of problem. This is a real issue. I'm working with an NGO called SIP, Sustainable Israeli-Palestinian Project, on essentially on addressing projects like this. It's a water basin, well-defined, cuts across different cultures. Same problem. How do I get clean water here? How do I get clean water here? How do I get clean water here when people upstream of me are dumping dirty water? How do I bring 3 to 4 engineers, Gaza engineers, Bedouin engineers, Palestinian engineers, and Israeli engineers around the same table and come up with a common problem to a common solution to a common problem? How do I do that? How do we train engineers in a classroom to do that? We don't, unless I'm missing something. If that's the case, then we need to bring more system thinking into the discussion. And one way of, compared to the previous diagram, what I have here is, instead of having silos, vertical silos where we put our students in, it's important to have also transdisciplinary programs around major issues like climate change. Someone is interested in climate change, comes from the field of engineering, will have depth in engineering, but will also learn about other disciplines, something about peace engineering, something about dealing with emergencies around the world, or indigenous cultures, or refugee camps, or what have you there. The problems in the world, what I want to show here is that the problems in the world are horizontal, our education is vertical. We've got a problem there. And more we are seeing, and COVID is a really good example, that essentially our problems are across the planet are horizontal. I'm not saying our model of education is bad. It needs to be adapted to a new world, a post-COVID world, if you want to put it that way. Peace engineering, as I mentioned to you, this is a new field. Actually, the first person who talked about peace engineering was Mr. Veslin in 2006, I think in Norway. And we brought it back to life around 2014 at Drexel University. This led to, under the leadership of Dr. Joe Hughes, an environmental engineer. I remember attending that first meeting there, where Joe was able to bring out, say, maybe 10 or 15 people from the Drexel campus from all sorts of disciplines, all believing in peace. Business, engineering, English, law, health, and so on. And all of them had never seen something like that before. Where around the table were probably 10 or 15 different disciplines, all converging, all saying there's something there that we can all agree on, is how do we integrate peace into our curriculum or our curricula. There's going to be a conference at the end of, in 2 weeks' time. Actually, it's going to be online at organized by University of New Mexico, which is a follow-up to a conference that took place in 2018 in Albuquerque. Now, the people who are going to attend the conference at the end of October include quite a few people from Los Alamos and Sandia National Lab. Ask somebody, next time you meet somebody from Sandia National Lab, ask them to show you their business cards. At the back of the card, you will see the mission statement of Sandia. It has the word peace in it. Whoa, Sandia, the atom bomb, Los Alamos, the atom bomb, and now they're talking about peace. Good. That's what we want. In fact, the vision of some people in New Mexico is to make New Mexico the peace state, not the atom bomb state. It's big. And peace there is not just a la-la land, three huggers on steroids dancing, at night, around the bonfire. We are talking essentially about training our engineers and scientists in conflict resolution, system thinking, making sure that they do a practicum where they will experience essentially the different aspects of conflict and peace. And you can see here, peace engineering cuts across essentially the 3 Ds that you see in Washington, DC: development, defense, and diplomacy. We want our students our engineers to disrupt poverty. This is one type of poverty that needs to be disrupted. This is a picture of taken by a colleague of mine, Alex Zahn, in Nepal at 15,000 feet into air pollution, killing millions of people every year. How would you prevent that? I tell my students, okay, come up with some engineering design here to prevent it. Usually, and you have $500 to do it, by the way. Easy. Ventilation, a new cook stove, a new fuel. We can do it. And we save lives. So this is one form of unnecessary pain, one form of poverty. Another form of poverty is this one, and I don't want to make it political. It's how much money we are spending on military expenditures per year in the world. That came from, boom, boom, boom. Where did I get information? International Institute for Strategic Studies. That's 2018, where essentially we were comfortable in 2018 in spending $61,000 per second on military expenditure. Hello? Hello, time to wake up here. Is that okay? No wonder we don't, I don't see too many aliens are going to come and visit this planet. No wonder we don't have too many aliens on, visitors coming to this planet. With something like this, $61,000 per second all year long. Another, you all have heard of how much money we spent on Afghanistan, in Afghanistan and Iraq over 20 years. It amounted to $32 million per hour, about $300 million per day on Afghanistan alone for 20 years. Is that insane? That's bad rap for science and technology, talking about the war industrial complex. Imagine, I'm nothing against defense. I think we need defense, don't get me wrong. But imagine if half of that money were to go on child immunization, water, food, energy, education, transportation. What kind of world would we have? And if science and technology were used for the greater good instead of destroying things. That number is the sign of an insane society. We are comfortable, and that's 2018. No one even know what it is today. We are comfortable as human, as citizens on this planet, to spend $61,000 per second all year long, year after year. Engineers Without Borders International, we want our students to make sure that they do some work in the field. And Engineers Without Borders International grew very quickly. There were different groups at the time when EWB USA was created. And now there are about 102 countries that have Engineers Without Borders groups. They are independent of each other, but essentially the mission is pretty much the same. Innovation. Yeah, we talk about fancy stuff, of course. On campus, we have lots of science and technology and the fancy technology and so on. We need it, don't get me wrong. But we also need technology that is affordable, accessible, available, sustainable, scalable, and reliable. Something that half of the world's population makes that less than $5 a day. This here water treatment system was developed by Tata, $22 essentially, too expensive for someone who makes $5 a day. Where someone would have to essentially trade in 4 days of work for these water filters. Maybe those 4 days of work will go for the education of a boy or education of a girl. How do we create good technology that can address the needs of billions of people on our planet who cannot afford much, essentially? There's an entire field, the entire field of appropriate technology. And there are several examples here. There's a really good example of a guy in India, a young man in India, did not have a PhD. And that young man developed an handheld EKG for $800. And was able to go portable, was able to go around villages and give essentially an EKG for $1 per patient. GE became really concerned about it and called it disruptive innovation. Good. Where we need more disruptive innovation. Not disruptive in a bad way, but disruptive in a good way, so that more people can live and survive by the end of the day. Leadership, it's very important. Where do we train leaders on campus? Show me where the leadership school on campus. I cannot find one. This is an excellent book, by the way, on heroic leadership. What's about leadership? The characteristics of a leader: self-awareness, ingenuity, love, compassion, and heroism. Concluding, let me finish here with this slide. We need a message I wanted to send tonight. I know I dumped a lot of stuff on you guys, and I tend to be very passionate about what I do. Otherwise, I will not do it. No passion, I don't do it. 20 years of experience with Engineers Without Borders, traveling the world and so on, has made me believe that we need to change our mindset. And this quote from Albert Einstein is very, very critical. Significant problems we face cannot be solved with the same level of thinking, the same that we were at when we created them. We need a new mindset in terms of peace versus conflict, mindset in terms of addressing the basic needs of people on our planet, mindset about economy, mindset about climate change, a new mindset, but not only a mindset, as I mentioned to you before, new form of leadership, addressing compassion. I do believe that compassion needs to be part of the curriculum of every human being on our planet. And the question is, how do we teach compassion into the classroom along with ethics, conflict resolution, and other things that are very practical, by the way? We need to do that. We need to accept change. And the three monkeys there on the right side, I've seen many of those three monkeys all over the planet. They're not limited to monkeys here in Boulder, Colorado, you find them all over the place. Monkeys who don't want to hear change, monkeys who don't want to see change, and monkeys who don't want to talk change. Let me remind you that change, there's a great quote from Margaret Whitley, that change, we talk about change, but very few people like change. The only people who like change are wet babies. Wet babies are the only people who like change. So it's one thing to talk about change, it's another thing to accept it and walk the change. It takes courage to do that, and it takes leadership to do that. So that's all I want to say tonight. I know it's a lot of stuff. I'm tired, to be frank with you. You know, it's been a long day. Lecture in the morning, lab in the afternoon, and lecture now. I hope I was able to convey my passion with you, and I hope I did not offend anybody. I'm not saying that model of education is bad. To the contrary, I think that it's a great model of education, but it's not enough. I think we really need to supplement what we have with a more with a mode of education with a higher level of consciousness that takes essentially the human aspect into consideration. So that's why I'm working on that book, Engineering with Soul, and essentially connecting the inner dimension of humans and the outer dimension that we do, through the work that we do as engineers, scientists, and technologists. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for that provocative talk, as always, and somber and reflective, apt for the time of the day. There are some questions in the chat, which I'll get to as many as I can, but maybe I can start off with one question. I think what you mentioned, and quite a few things resonated with me as well. Again, growing up in my own time, for good part, we didn't have running water. So some of the things that you were describing that inspired you, I can quite well relate to. And the point about changing mindset, I think is really so apt. And I think it was the Gus quote by Gus. And that is a much harder problem. And I think we are more good at, I see a problem outside, let me change things to my will. But then a lot of these things that you're saying requires changing the will internally. And I think that's, I find big difference between sort of the Eastern and Western tradition, and a happy medium, I think, is where the EWB and others that you've conceived. So let me go through some questions that's there in the chat. So the first one is Julie Charlton asks, Starlink programs by Elon Musk, and those kind of programs change situation in Africa? And if so, how do you recommend students engage with such programs? Wonder if you're aware of it.
No, I know there are big programs at play. Most of my projects are at the local level. So, I'll be glad to look into that area. There are some great thinkers that are essentially putting money and technology to solve those global issues that we talked about tonight. But it goes back again, I go back to that quote, is bringing more technology the only answer to the problems the planet is facing today? It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's what you do with the technology. Is that technology good for the environment? Is the technology good for the people? Does it bring peace and does not divide people? Does it bring partnership? And is it profitable? If one of those 5 questions has a no answer, that technology, in my opinion, is no good. So not the technology itself, it's what you do with it.
The next 2 questions I'm going to combine Bob Grossman's and Werner Studer's. and I'll read Werner's, which is, you alluded to, but never directly addressed, nor have I seen addressed in various social media avenues. The underlying driver of many of these problems is overpopulation. And then Bob's related question is, can this help with that? Because a lot of the stress on the natural resources worldwide is because, like you said, there's more population than the earth can sustain. And everybody wants to live like Americans, right? So you combine the two, then can these help with that aspect of the problem, which is clearly sort of the elephant in the room, if you will?
You mean overpopulation being
the overpopulation? Yes.
Well, that's certainly an issue, and that's also changing. I was reading an article this morning that actually the population of Russia is decreasing. The population of certain countries is also decreasing. But of course, you have, the big elephants in the room, like China and India, where you have, population increasing also very rapidly. Nigeria is another good example. So yes, obviously the population issue is one issue that needs to be addressed, but also the consumption. I was reading, you probably read that Lake Mead is decreasing, the water level is decreasing. So all the people in Las Vegas are screaming bloody hell and say, what's going to happen there? Well, they should also tell you that that in Las Vegas, each hotel in Las Vegas consumes the same amount of water as a city of 30,000 people per day. Well, what about maybe cutting down the consumption? And maybe we could, maybe there may be enough water essentially available for the needs of Las Vegas if they were to cut down the consumption. There's no place, there are very few places on the planet. There are very few places on the planet where there's no water, no rain. The issue is not rain, it's not water, it's water management. It's food management, it's energy management, it's human management, it's consumption management. There's plenty of rain, there's plenty of water, but we mismanage it. I spend a lot of time in Israel, and I go there pretty much every year. Hopefully, not this year, but I was there last year. But if you want to learn about water and water consumption, go to Israel. 85% of wastewater in Israel is recycled for irrigation. And do you know how much it is in the United States? 5%. It's about time that we start recycling wastewater in southwestern part of the United States before it's too late. Israel also has invested a lot in desalination plants. Where are the desalination plants in the United States? Is there any plan to build one on the West Coast or on the East Coast? You don't build a desalination plant overnight. I think it's the question of, we have in a situation right now, climate change. I prefer to call it a change in climate change, second derivative or first derivative of climate change. It's happening, there's no doubt about it. Can we be a little bit forward thinking in terms of developing technologies and reducing our consumption all at the same time? Again, the southwestern part of the United States, I read another article that at the rate it's going right now, the temperature is going to increase so much in the southwestern part of the United States by 2050, this place where we are right now will not be livable. Where are we going to go? Are we going to be climate refugees and move to Canada? We won't be able to move to Mexico because there's a wall there, so they won't let us in. Talking about climate refugees there.
So I think on the population, I can maybe again in India, in my own family and extended family, 3 generations, 2 generations, my grandfather, grandmother generation had large families. And I look at my generation, my cousins, 0 kids. So within just 1 generation, the population has significantly reduced. And I would attribute a lot of that to education.
Of women.
Education of particularly women. You're absolutely right. Education of women, and my generation or even my generation above and below have all gone to college. And suddenly, or even without college, with a lot of exposure, education, that makes a huge difference. And within a generation, you can make a significant dent in the population. And I think this goes back to your point about spending. Again, these are really low cost, huge bang for money. In fact, so I definitely, I think a lot of these do help. Again, drinking water, getting street lights means suddenly you can study and go to school, right? So, and clearly when you're studying, nobody's thinking of having kids, right? And the more you delay, you end up raising good society. Let me go through some more. On the desalination, there is one or two, I think, from Julie Charton. Carlsbad, California has a desalination plant. Florida, Tampa, I know. And usually when there is a drought, there is a lot of interest in these desalination plants. They set up these plants, and then after that, they lose interest and they're all sort of mothballed. But on the Southwest US, yes, if we don't act, nature will do it for us. And again, I do a lot of my work on the Colorado River. And I always tell the societies that inhabited the river, the Native Americans that went away because of droughts, they had a reason, because they didn't know climate variability, and they did their best. Whereas if we go extinct, I think it'll be deserved, well deserved, because we knew everything, we knew a lot more via technology, and still we decided to do, decided to do stupid things.
And we are perfectly fine in spending $61,000 a second, on military expenditure. That essentially, I'm half Italian and half French. My Italian blood essentially boils when I hear something like that. Frankly, yeah. Imagine, if we could put half of that money, not cutting defense, into stuff that is of value to society, that improves.
The other point also is, a lot of these things are not very, to use the word sexy, and they all have delayed gratification. You invest money in girl literacy or female literacy, that's going to pay off in a generation. Somehow we collectively, at least in the developed world, we just don't have the patience for that. We want instant, and some of these other avenues, the industrial, military, they give you much more instant pleasure.
There was an interesting question from Merle. They talk about essentially giving.
Yes, go ahead. They're doubling the amount of water they would send to Jordan is not.
It's an interesting example of peace engineering and between Jordan and Israel, where Israel needs the electricity from Jordan and Jordan needs the water from Israel. Here's a good example of collaboration between the two. It can be win-win, even though we are dealing essentially with two different cultures. Jordan exists because is at peace with all the surrounding countries because they need water from the surrounding countries. Water is a great equalizer. So peace engineering is not, again, no, be careful. Not peace engineering is not a bunch of tree huggers on steroid, dancing around, a bonfire. It's real stuff. It is about, there's an entire field of engineering diplomacy and science diplomacy where people get together around the table, even though they come from different cultures, different political sides. They have a common problem, they come up with a common solution. You want the best example of science diplomacy is what happened in 1975 when a Soyuz spacecraft and an Apollo spacecraft docked in space. Think about the amount of science and technology that had to take place to get the docking for an astronaut and a cosmonaut to shake their hands, when at the same time on Earth, there was the Cold War. Can we repeat? In fact, I use that as the Soyuz Apollo moment. can we create more Soyuz Apollo moments on our planet in the years to come? We can, if we have the will to do so. That's the best example of science diplomacy I can think of.
In fact, you make a very good point between India and Pakistan, as many all you know, that there are always tensions. None of the tensions or the 2 or 3 wars they fought erupted over water. In fact, the Indus River starts in Pakistan, and there's agreements that were written just when the partition happened or soon after that, and even during the war and through the wars, they have been honored, and so it's amazing how, like Bernard said, that there is avenues that people don't fight, although people think they would fight over water, but water has a way of getting people to negotiating. Same thing with India and Bangladesh. Also similarly, there's always skirmishes on other issues, but water is one where. And you can see that in the Nile Basin as well, with Ethiopia and now Egypt. So
and Sudan and Ethiopia.
Exactly, yeah. I'm trying to see if there's any other question. There was one from Aaron Brown on how the limitations of accreditation on sort of expanding it to include some of the things that you rightfully recognized needs to be in the curriculum, such as.
Oh, very much. I think that's a very steep hill to climb there. Yeah, how do you get traditional organizations like ABET, doing accreditation of engineering program to accept changes in the add-ons? I'm not doing changes. Add-ons to the existing curriculum, so we create more essentially global engineers, more engineers with more of a global engagement. That's obviously, but it's worth trying, right? I think go ahead. You're the chair of the department.
No, and I think on this one I can say that there was a nice chart somebody presented where if you take all the professional courses, medical, law, engineering, and then you look at the minimum credits necessary for graduation through the years. Engineering minimum credits have gone down. In fact, our credits are now 128. So there is so much pressure. Within that 128 credits, you have to teach them basic sciences, you have humanities, and in an area like civil engineering, which is so broad, we need some amount of proficiency in 6 different sub-disciplines of civil engineering. There is just no space for anything else. And the number of credits have steadily declined. So clearly what this is crying out for is, there has to be either some add-on or like make it a BSMS with an extra year, which then gets all of this. But otherwise, I just don't see how you can cram anything more into what is already so tight and fewer than what it was. I'm sure, Bernard, when you did your undergrad, and certainly when I did my undergrad, we had a lot more credits than what we are doing now. And interestingly, now also we need a lot more things to be packed in because of the changing world, both in terms of technology, culture, society. And that's as Aaron pointed out, it is a difficult and challenging task. It's collectively decided. Yeah. So
more important, Balaji, is to go from that I type of education, very specialized education, to a T type education. I think that we need to create more, essentially, global citizen engineers who cut across, who are more aware of the needs of the planet, rather than just more specialized individuals. We do that with the PhD. I mean, nothing wrong about the PhD, but essentially, good question is, well, do we need more PhDs on our planet? Or do we need people with a broader, more global perspective to address the critical issues that we are facing today. I really believe in that type of education, and I don't see it. I know there are very few schools in the US that are trying it. To a certain extent, we have some of it in our civil engineering program because students have to take 18 credit hours of social humanistic electives, but it's random. It's really random. And,
exactly.
And I think we can do better than that. I
agree.
So what I wanted to do tonight was not to, criticize essentially our models of education. I want to say that, again, I want to repeat that, is that our models of education are not in par with the needs of our planet. We need to change things, right? I mean, they need to be a little bit broader in perspective than what they have been until recently. I think that horizontal integration is key. Yes, we need experts, but we also need people who can address climate change from many different perspectives.
Thank you very much, Bernard. We are at the end of our time. Merle had a comment saying that some of our colleagues will be at the COP26, and she was mentioning that the military, in fact, our military is much more ahead on these. They believe the next wars will be on resource, particularly water and climate and migration. In fact, they have been much more worried about climate migrants way ahead of their time. Again, thank you very much, Bernard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My goodness. Thank you. So I want to thank you so much, Bernard. It was inspiring and very challenging. And I must say, this is one time when, as a retired professor, I wish I could get back into teaching and to work on an integrated curriculum. I must say, for many years, I was running the honors program in arts and sciences, and we really did have a T-shaped model. And I don't think we've been doing that badly in the University of Colorado, because you probably know we are one of the leaders in the number of graduates who go into the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps is indeed exactly what you are aiming toward. If they don't go into the Peace Corps with the kind of inspiration that you provided tonight, they learn it in the process of being in these foreign countries. So anyhow, I think things are really not as bad as they could be, but they certainly can be better. So it's my opportunity to describe what's going to happen next. Our next talk is going to be on November 10th by Professor Daniel Shears, who is in aeronautical engineering, and he has been one of the world leaders in the study of asteroids, which might seem pretty far away from human needs, but as you may probably remember, 65 million years ago, an asteroid interrupted the evolution of life on the Earth that eventually resulted in us. Professor Shears has been particularly interested in the asteroid that I show in the picture, which is called Bennu. Bennu is a huge rubble pile as large as the Empire State Building that may indeed be on a collision course with the Earth around 2180 or something like that. So there is a possibility that we will become extinct by other means than simply spending too much money on armaments. But anyhow, so November 10th, please tune in again for it should be a very interesting talk on exploring the asteroids of the solar system. So thank you very much for coming, and we hope to see you again.